They put them right there on the thing, and it's do not pass go. If you go past this, we're going to flag you down from upstairs while you're speaking. Like, don't move. Okay. Well, good morning. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Highland Church of Christ. My name is Chad Lehman, and I am the education minister at the Great Church of Christ in Columbia, Tennessee. And that is far away from here, as you know. And it was an interesting journey to get here, and we had a good session last night and kind of introduced the topic. So if you were not here last night and did not hear all that, that's a good introductory topic to all the things that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to have a few sessions today. We've got a bonus session, actually, what I've been calling. Jovan asked for 3 talks this morning, and so we're going to do an addiction-specific talk and how we can kind of combat smartphone and screen addiction in the next session. This session will be our shortest of the day to kind of just get our feet wet and kind of get going, but we're going to be talking about social media and the social dilemma that we have, and I'll tell you about that here in just a second. And then that third session is going to be the one that you're really going to want to talk about, probably be around 10:30 to 11. And we're going to talk about device control and literally going through all those settings, talking about technical things, talking about Wi-Fi routers and different things like that. And so if you have any questions, and I wanted to be on the floor today just to talk to you and get some input from you about certain things and have some certain discussion. And if people on the web that are watching, if you're watching online, you can actually go to my website, chadl.co/DPW, Digital Parenting Workshop, and you can actually fill out a form there and ask a question. You can actually, I'll put a phone number up here for you in a second to text me a question if you'd like, but there is no such thing as a dumb question for this kind of stuff, because there's all sorts of different things that people don't know about. And what I find is very, very powerful in almost every single one of these workshops that I do is that the parents and grandparents that are in attendance talk to one another and help one another out. And you didn't know necessarily what the struggles were happening with this young family or this young family. And so it's very, very important to kind of get that group think going. So today, this morning, we're going to start off by talking about the social dilemma. And I have titled that because it is sort of a dilemma. This is a phenomenal, unbelievably great tool that we have with social media and communication. It's the ability to connect across generations, connect across the country, connect across the world. Right now, we're streaming live to who knows how many people. Anybody can tune in any part of the world and watch what we're doing right now. And that was just not something that was possible 10 or 15 years ago. And so it's an amazing, amazing time to be living with this technology. But with that technology comes the downsides as well. And that's what we're talking about with this dilemma. I think we have a couple of ideas here that we're going to talk about here this morning in this first session. It's, for one thing, it's our own lack of knowledge. It's the fear of the unknown. And sometimes you may look at the idea of social media and apps for your kids and apps for these different things as something that just, it's a big ball of confusion. You have no idea what to do with it. If you have smaller kids, they're going to eventually grow up to want their own devices and want to be on these social networks. I have a 10-year-old who's already asking for a phone. He's already asking to be on Instagram and YouTube and he wants his own YouTube channel and things like that. And I'm like, that's not happening. So you might as well it's not happening for a while, so you might as well just forget about it. But it's those different types of things. And so our lack of knowledge here, but also kind of the negative influence, not just on our kids, but us too, our culture. I think we have seen, especially in the pandemic, and especially in the last, and I'm not going to get political, but the last election and all the things that went along with the politics of that, since 2017, 2018, we have seen a dramatic rise in those things. I talked about depressive symptoms last night. There's been an 18% increase in depressive symptoms in 14 to 22-year-olds just in the last 22 months since the pandemic began. And so that is something that we have to look out for. That is something that we as parents, as the protectors, have to make sure that we're protecting our children from. And then the third thing that we're going to talk about is how to successfully navigate social media and teach our children to be responsible digital citizens. I want to start off by talking about my little boy right here. This is my little boy. In the foreground, he's the one that's got his hands up on the thing. This is, by the way, a $150 stock tank from Tractor Supply. And it's the best swimming pool for two little boys that you can buy. Because we didn't have a swimming pool. We bought that, and it was great, and they loved it. And so it was amazing. The one in the photo bombing in the background is David. He is a carbon copy of me. Everything he does and says is a carbon copy of me, and he was not supposed to be in that picture, but he actually ended up being in that picture. But Jacob here in the foreground, he's 10 years old now. He's actually much younger in this photo. When he was 2 years old, a little bit less than that actually, we had that sinking feeling as a parent. Like something just wasn't right. You know how it is when your kids are about to get sick or something's wrong with them and they won't talk to you about something, and we had that sinking feeling that something just wasn't right, and he wasn't doing anything wrong. There wasn't any kind of telltale signs, but we just felt like something wasn't right. We took him to, in my opinion, one of the best medical facilities in the country that we live, just happened to live 40 minutes south of, and it's Vanderbilt Children's Medical Center. And he was diagnosed very quickly with autism spectrum disorder. Now, I don't know if you know anything or are familiar with autism spectrum disorder, but he is not high functioning. It's hard to have a conversation with him. It's hard to get him to understand, get out of the routine. And you've seen the struggles that maybe you know people that have autistic kids and people that struggle with that. But we were devastated by that decision. Because our firstborn child, we didn't have any other children at that point. We were devastated by that. And we didn't know what to do. My natural reaction as a man was, well, I got to fix this, and I'm angry, and I got to fix this, right? And of course, my wife's reaction was just sadness. Just didn't know what to do. And at that point, it was one of those things where we were forced to give it to the Lord. We were forced to give it to Him because we couldn't handle it ourselves. And one thing that we have done in the last, ever since we got that diagnosis, boom, there was a ton of things in the state of Tennessee that kicked in for Jacob. He got all sorts of support that we have almost nearly never had to pay for, even in the last 8 years. He's had the same behavioral specialist that comes to our home once a week for the last 7 years. It is unbelievable the support that he's gotten. And over and over and over, doctors and nurses and psychotherapists and people and behavioral specialists that have met with Jacob and with us have told us one singular thing over and over and over and over again. They said, because you did this early, because you had what they call early intervention, you were able to get him the help that he needed. Because you were proactive, not reactive. Because you swallowed your pride. I had to swallow my pride. It was me, the man behind the man part of me was going, he's fine, he's fine. We don't need to see anything. But it was my wife that said, no, we need to go get him checked. And it's because of her proactiveness, because of her ambition to get that done, that we were able to get him the help. He is doing phenomenal in school now. He made a trailer on his iPad yesterday and shared it with my wife, and my wife sent it to me. It's like he loves doing video stuff and loves doing everything with his iPad. It's amazing how creative he is. He can't express himself to me in a verbal way, but his creativity with this technology is unbelievably amazing. We have to make sure that as parents, we have to make sure that we are trying to see 3, 4, 5 steps down the trail. We have to make sure that we are planning. We plan in all these other things. I'm talking to a financial advisor now back in Tennessee, and I'm planning some financial things with my dad passing away last month, and we've got some extra cash, and we're just planning all this stuff. We plan all sorts of things. We plan retirement. We plan college funds. We plan all this stuff. We've got to plan a strategy in our homes for technology. I see you guys right here with these young children. And I know that you're here this morning because you know that it's coming. And so the time to start planning is now. If you've got a 17-year-old, a 16, a 15-year-old, and you haven't done what you thought you should do up to this point, considering technology, it is never too late to start. You can always start being proactive. So again, I tell you all that to say be proactive, not reactive. And the dilemma that we have when it concerns social media. I named this the social dilemma because of the special on Netflix. Has anybody seen the Netflix special? Okay, so good. It is incredible and incredibly eye-opening. And I would invite you, if you've got Netflix or if you can borrow a Netflix account from somebody, to watch this because it is unbelievable. The creators and the people who design things like Twitter and Pinterest and Instagram talking about their creations and how they have been completely perverted and completely been blown out of proportion to what the original thought and intent was. And it's amazing to hear, and so I'd invite you to talk about that. But that is the dilemma that we are facing right now. When we think about what's wrong with it, I want to ask you this morning, what do you think is wrong with social media as a whole? What do you think is the things that that things that are not being done correctly or not being protected enough for our children? What are some things that you, and I want to get your input this morning. I know it's early. I know you probably haven't had all your coffee yet. But I would love to hear what you think about this question. What do you think is some things that are wrong with social media? Perception. Elaborate on that.
The images that we see, families are perfect, life is perfect. We don't see every single thing that's going on in people's lives. We don't see the things that people want us to know about.
It's the projection of perfect, right? It's the I've got everything put together, why don't you? And we know that's not the case, right? We know everybody and every family has struggles and everybody has things that they're dealing with. But again, that's that alternate perception that we can see. And let me tell you something, that's a huge deal. When it comes to your middle schooler and high schooler looking at those images, when they see perfection in other people's bodies that are just as old as them, when they see that their body's not perfect, when they see that these photoshopped images that they think maybe are real, that's a perception that really dives deep. I told you last night, middle schoolers do not need any social media. You have to introduce that idea, but that is not the time to do it. Because they are forming their identities. Those neurons are firing at a crazy rate when they're in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And what they don't need to see is somebody's alternate and perfect perception of, well, you got to wear these sorts of things, or you got to have, your body has to look like this for you to be a part of society. That's a perception that they don't need. Excellent thought. Anything else? What's wrong with it? Yes, ma'am. Instant access, usually with a lack of filters. That's a great way to put that. Because when we think about the access that we have. I have a lunch with our ministers and some of the ministers around the area. I'm privileged to be in a town where there's many churches of Christ and there's many ministers that I can have lunch with. And from time to time, we'll be arguing about something. We're just arguing about somebody who went to, where did Justin Herbert go to college? And somebody was saying, oh, he went to UCLA. No, I was like, no, he went to Oregon. And people didn't know. And I said, why are we arguing about this? We got it right here. In fact, we don't even have to type in anything. We can ask the phone with our voice, hey, where did he play in college? And it's going to tell us just like that. We have access to unlimited information at our fingertips. Now think about that in the context of your 7-year-old, your 12-year-old, your 16-year-old. if there are not protections put on this device, the device that they use, the device that they have in their living rooms, the devices that they use every single day. That's without filters. My 7-year-old, I told you about, the one that photobombed in the photo, he's the one that I could tell, I could look at him with a dad face. And I could go, stop, come here right now. You know how it is. The dad voice, the dad face, not nearly as good as the mom voice. But if I did that, he would look at me and smile and run the opposite direction. That's how he is. He's a little boy, he's 7 years old, and he's a carbon copy of me. Never in a million years would I take him to a park that's by a busy road, that didn't have any kind of fences set up, and not watch him and just hope that he didn't get hurt. Never would I do that. And we wouldn't do that as parents either. But why are we doing it with devices? We've got to set up those fences. We've got to set up those protections and those filters, as she so eloquently put it. Give me one more. What's wrong with social media? Yes, sir.
People post and everything, and they're giving away too much about themselves for other people to find out and have no business knowing.
They're giving away too much about themselves. Really people that don't have any business knowing, right? We've all seen those people, right? We've all seen the oversharers. We've all seen the people that I pull back in the I'm like a rubber band. I pull back in the opposite direction. I hardly ever post anything to Facebook. I just don't care for it. I'm a little bit more vocal on Twitter, and I probably, again, overshare. I think at some point, on certain things, that we overshare some as well. But yeah, that's an excellent point. And let me tell you, kids who have grown up with this technology, and you think, I keep looking at your small kids this morning right here. You think about the world that they will grow up in. They will never know the world without YouTube, the world without something like Twitter or Instagram. They will never know the world without Facebook. Yet we, as 30 to 40 to 50-year-old people, we grew up without that. We know exactly what the world was like before it. We knew exactly that we had to videotape something to see it later, right? Remember that? But your kids are growing up in a world where sharing everything, like you just said, oversharing things, they don't know, and we must teach them in order to help them be responsible digital citizens. That first starts off, I said last night that this was a parenting issue more than it is a technology issue. We can blame the technology quite a bit. We're going to talk a lot about addiction in the next session, and it's kind of wild what you can hear about some of this stuff, and I hope that there's some material that you haven't heard before. But when we perceive, what we perceive on social media is not the real world, and we do not need to overshare. Johan? Yes. Followers, likes, views, yeah. There's a whole trend for that with teenagers right now. If they don't get a certain number of likes on Instagram, they'll just delete the photo like it never happened. Now, it's still there, it's still accessible and things like that, because nothing ever disappears on the internet, but they will delete that photo because I didn't get 100 likes. That is a very false kind of way and false idea and a way to live. Especially if you grow up and that is your perception, that if not enough people like me, or if I don't get enough views, then I'm considered worthless, right? Excellent observations. Let's keep going here. I want to tell you a few things, and I really appreciate all the comments and suggestions here. Social media does not have your child's best interests at heart. In fact, it does not have anybody's best interests at heart. A gentleman up here said something about posting about perception and oversharing, different things like that. They make a dime off of every time you do something. In fact, you are paying for all of these things with your data. And when we're able to tell our children that very fact, just because it's free, it's not free. There's no such thing as a free lunch, right? Somebody's paying for it somewhere, and you are paying for it with your data. Social media does not care about your child. They don't care about you. They care about their bottom line. And in fact, when you think about social media, who might you say the most evil the worst app out there is. I know who it is, but I want to hear what you think. What do you think the worst app out there, the worst social media network out there is? What do you think? TikTok? What's that? Okay. Snapchat? Snapchat I would consider social media. I would consider TikTok social media as well. Anybody else? While TikTok and Snapchat, I would say Snapchat more so because the creators literally created Snapchat to be a sexting app to send inappropriate things. There's proof of that. That's the reason that they created it. They have evil intentions. They know exactly who their target demographic is. It's 16 to 22-year-olds. They target that actively with things that 16 to 22-year-olds should not see. Right? I see that as evil, but let me tell you something. As far as privacy goes, as far as the seeping out, just the sucking of your data, Facebook is by far and away the worst. And we might see Facebook as the safer social network, right? We might see Facebook as something that is the biggest demographic on Facebook now is 45 to 55. Okay, did you know what it was 5 years ago? It was 35 to 45. We just kind of moved on down that line, right? And Facebook, I'm telling you right now, they are targeting every single thing. They don't need, have you ever had the ads pop up on your Facebook account that you were just talking to somebody about? And oh, it's super creepy, right? They're recording my voice. They're using my phone as a camera. Your Alexa device in your home is recording your voice, and they're recording everything you say. They don't need to record everything you say. They don't need to. You know why? Because they have so many data points about you. Facebook alone, this is all I'm talking about is Facebook. They have so many data points about you that they can figure out, based upon those data points, that you're looking for a couch right now, or that you're shopping for your wife's birthday, or that you're doing these different things. They can say by the searches that you've done on Google, oh, Facebook doesn't know what I search on Google. Facebook knows everything. If you have it on your phone, they know everything on your phone. There's nothing secret. In some parts, Apple has tried to shut them down and put these gates up and put these fences up, but they just keep finding ways around them. They keep finding little places to go. And so again, we have to understand that maybe it looks like the safest social network out there, but it is far from it. So again, I think what the gentleman talked up here about was oversharing too much. The church word I talked about last night is being discerning. We have to teach our kids how to be discerning and to see through things that are fake, see through those things that are not real and not overshare. Okay? Excellent comments. We talked about a little bit about privacy. I could talk about privacy all day long, and we just talked a little bit about that. But I will just tell you, privacy might as well be a mirage in the desert because it's not real when it comes to these phones, these devices, these applications. If anything promises to be encrypted, anything promises to be secret, anything promises, Snapchat built themselves on the idea of deleting a photo after a certain number of seconds. Those photos don't go anywhere. They may disappear off your phone and off the app, but they're still in Snapchat servers. They still have to keep them around by law for 18, 24 months. It's amazing how naive we are sometimes, but our kids can be even more naive because they grew up with this technology in their hands. And then again, that's a perception that we have to understand as we teach them responsible behavior. Privacy is an illusion, and I've talked a little bit about this as well, but when it comes to these social networks, the key idea is that you're a product, not the customer. When you walk into, now what's the grocery store? It's Safeway. It's a Safeway around here, isn't it? What's the grocery store around here? Is that at Walmart? Save, okay. When you walk into that Save Mart, okay? When you walk into that, you're their customer. You're not the product. You're not sitting up on the shelf. You're the customer. When you're on Facebook or Twitter, Instagram, any of those, you are the product. You are the data that they are siphoning and getting. You read that end user license agreement, all the lawyer gobbledygook that you just hit accept for when you signed up, and it says some amazing stuff. We could take all day and dissect one of those end-user license agreements. It's unbelievable what they can take from you. It's unbelievable how they can use your information. Privacy is an illusion. Before we get to talking about some really fun, I got some fun stuff here. It's not all doom and gloom. I got some fun stuff here in a second. Are there any questions? I just want to kind of pause. Any questions, anything that you'd like to comment on and say before we kind of move on? Okay. I asked a bunch of teenagers what they thought about the two biggest social networks out there. Facebook. Facebook has over 2 billion users, which that's a crazy number to even think about. Twitter is approaching 900 million, almost a billion users, and we're going to talk about Twitter here in a second. But there's a stark contrast in the perception of teenagers, the perception of young people, versus the perception of older people, parents and grandparents, when it comes to Facebook. And there's some pretty funny things that they said, but they also tell us a lot, okay? So about Facebook, this is what one kid said. He said, oh, that Facebook, that's where my dad goes to complain about stuff. Now, that's funny, but at the same time, it's kind of not, because I know this kid, and yes, his dad does, every single day. If he's not complaining about politics, he's complaining about the new road they're building in Columbia. He's complaining about the pizza that he ate and it wasn't delivered on time, or he's complaining about something. And that's the first thing that popped in that kid's head. Oh yeah, Facebook, that's where my dad goes to complain about stuff. Interesting. You know, kids essentially have their own little spy network on their adults in their lives. How many of you think that kids don't use Facebook? Teenagers don't use Facebook? Teenagers anywhere from 16 to 24 years old, it is the lowest demographic on Facebook because Facebook is largely perceived now as being for old people, right? And old people could be 30-year-olds as far as they're concerned. But when you think about that, it is incredible to see how many kids are on Facebook and are monitoring and looking at things on Facebook, looking at what we're all posting. They're just not interacting. They're just not posting themselves. They're just not liking and retweeting and sharing and getting mad about this political candidate and whatnot, right? And so the perception there is that they're watching us. We need to make sure that we're doing the right things and saying the right things when we're sharing. Facebook is where my mom tags me in photos I don't want anybody to see. I know there's a mom at Graymere, and I know the girl who said this. There's a mom at Graymere who digs into their old photo albums and scans photos and just blanket puts them on Facebook. Doesn't even think about it. And I heard her arguing with her mom one time about, you cannot put that, I'm in the bathtub and I'm like 3 years old, you can't do that. You know, and just that kind of thing. It's funny, but again, it's kind of not funny. It's mainly for old people, like my mom and my dad, and my grandpa writes on it in all caps. Now, why do, it's a funny thing, why do older people tend to write in all caps on those things? Why do they do that? First of all, what's the internet vernacular for all caps? Yelling, right? Screaming. And why would old people write on that? Well, just because it's easier for them to see. On those tiny screens, phones didn't used to be huge phones. They used to have tiny little screens, and it's easier for them to see. That's what I hear all the time. Why do you write in all caps? Well, it's easier to see. But they don't understand that it's yelling. Because my wife will post a photo of our boys or something, and there's always that lovely older woman at Graymere that posts, lovely pictures, thank you for sharing. It's okay, tone it down a little bit. Tone it down, thank you. So it's really funny. Now, when we think about Twitter, it gets a little bit more dreary when we talk about Twitter. I don't know if you've been on Twitter recently. I don't know if you've had any experience with that. I don't know if you have an account on there, but Twitter can tend to be incredibly trashy. And again, just picking out these two most popular social networks that we have, you can get to something very, very illicit in just a few taps on Twitter. And so that would not be the social network that I would absolutely choose for your kid to introduce him to social media at all. But it's interesting what kids said about Twitter, because a lot of them don't necessarily have Twitter accounts, but they go on Twitter and they see what's going on, and they see the tweets on websites and things like that, and people send them links from it and stuff like that. But it's interesting what they said. They said it's the social network my parents don't know how to use. Now, the kid that said this was saying it with the underlying pretext of, my parents don't know how to use Snapchat. My parents don't know how to use TikTok. My parents don't know how to use Twitter. Guess where I'm going to go? Guess where I want to hang out? You see, us as older people, I don't know about you, but the place that I hung out when I was a teenager was the grocery store parking lot in Newmarket, Alabama, and I was skateboarding and doing hacky sack. And you know why? Because my parents weren't there. Wherever they were going, I went the opposite direction on Friday night. That's the same idea that we have with kids in the digital age. Wherever the adults are, Facebook, they're going to go the opposite direction. And sometimes they're going to deliberately pick things that you don't understand, that where you're not going to hang out. The cardinal rule here is, if you allow your children to have those accounts on those social networks, then you need to be on there with them. I said last night that it's not going to be an excuse when we are held accountable to God at the end of our life, at the end of time, and we are held accountable for all the things that we taught our children. We're going to be held accountable for just as much as we taught them in real life as we did on the digital life, because this is almost more influential. So we need to be very, very aware of that. So, in the wild west of the internet, pretty much anything goes. That's telling for a kid to say something like that. Twitter is where my parents can't keep up with me. This child had a Twitter account. I can neither confirm or deny. There you go, Chris. I can neither confirm or deny that I have followed certain kids from Graymere and look at what they say and look at who they follow. This kid is fine, but there's a lot of kids that aren't. This idea of wearing a mask and not being able to people to see who you actually are on the web. And that has become a very popular thing with kids. It's where I can say what I want to without being judged, and nobody knows who I really am. That's wearing a mask. That's literally the definition of a hypocrite. I'm not going to spout off any kind of Greek words or anything to you, but hypocrite, that word means to be an actor, to wear a mask. And that is what some kids, not all, but some kids want to be able to do. And they want to be able to create these fake accounts, create these what they call Finstagrams, fake Instagrams, all these other different things. And so we need to be, again, aware of these certain things. I want you to turn to James chapter 3. We're going to get to this real quickly as a biblical thought and idea, and then we'll be done with this talk this morning. And we'll have a short break after this. But in James chapter 3, James talks about how we use our words. And so much of social media, so much of what we do on these phones is really just an extension of what we're saying out loud. It's really, our thumbs are just an extension to those keyboards of what we say and the words that we use. And James here in James chapter 3 says a lot about how we use our words and what kind of damage they can do if we don't watch them. James chapter 3, beginning in verse 2. For we all stumble in many ways. There you go, whole sermon right there. Right? We all stumble in many ways. And if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to also bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also, though they are so large or driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue, so also our words, is what he's saying, is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire. Our words are fire. A world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird and reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. And this right here, this next verse is this idea that I want to get across here of how we are using our tongues, how we're using our words to damage or to lift up. With it, with our tongues, with our words, we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who were made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so. I think that's an incredibly telling verse for us to think about when it comes to using our speech, our words, our tongues. Sometimes I read that verse to a bunch of teenagers and I put thumbs instead of tongues because we're so often just doing this. It's the same idea here. He uses 3 examples: horses, ships, and forest fires. I'm only going to speak to one of those examples. This is a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. It is 2,100 feet long, 450 feet wide. It has about 3,100 officers and crew aboard. It displaces 200,000 tons of water in the ocean when it's in any kind of body of water. It runs on nuclear power. It only has to be refueled every 15 to 20 years. Now, how big do you think the rudder of this ship is? The thing that makes, you've been on a boat before, a pontoon boat, you may have seen the rudder that's maybe under the water. Rudders don't have to be very large, do they? Now granted, this ship has a large rudder, but it's not nearly as big as you would think it would be. And it directs the ship. It's basically 20 feet by 30 feet, probably not even as big as this section of pews right here. And it is guiding this entire ship to where it's supposed to go. And that's what James here is saying. Our words guide people. They can guide people to ideas. They can guide people to Christ. They can guide people to destruction. And we have to make sure that what we're saying is wholesome, is true, is just, all those things and the fruits of the Spirit, right? We have to make sure that we get this idea across to our kids as well, that everything we say is influencing minds and influencing people. Okay, any questions? As we are done with this first little talk, we'll take a quick break. Any questions, any thoughts? Okay, we're going to talk about addiction next. It's not easy to hear, but it is. I've got 9:44 on my watch. We'll go ahead and just do a little 6-minute break, and we'll be back at 9:50. Thank you so much. Absolutely.